Hello and welcome to She the People. I am Tanvi Khori, and today we are hosting our Digital Safety Summit, which is a collective conversation on current issues that can help us understand our ever changing digital environment. It is an opportunity for professionals to share ideas about urgent realities faced by women and children and hear evolving approaches and solutions by expert panels of speakers. We have one such panel today to discuss the ever pressing issue of child sexual abuse and exploitation. Our first panelist for the day is Vidya Reddy, who's among the co-founders of Tulir, a Center for the Prevention and Healing of Child Sexual Abuse. It is an NGO based in Chennai. The word Tulir in Tamil means first leaves of a plant, which expresses the NGO's belief in children and their resilience. Reddy has worked extensively with children's issues and in education and psychology. Welcome, Vidya.
Thank you. Thank you, Tanvi.
My next panelist is Tsitsi Matekaire. She's joining us from London today. She's the global lead on end sexual exploitation with the human rights organization Equality Now, which advocates for the rights of women and girls. She has over 16 years of experience and is a legal authority on women's rights and gender-based violence. Hi, Tsitsi. Welcome to She the People.
Thank you, Tanvi.
Our third panelist for the day is Dr. Debarati Halder. She's our second legal expert on the panel today. She's the co-founder of Center for Cyber Victim Counselling, which is India's first such center of its kind. She's a cyber victim counselor and has authored multiple works on criminology, cybercrime, and child sexual exploitation. Dr. Debarati, welcome.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you here today, panelists. Our topic for the day is child sexual abuse and exploitation, and we're going to be discussing a little bit about the kind of realities that are there on ground today, and how children who are among the most highly vulnerable groups to gendered abuse, sexual harassment, online security breaches, and real-time physical and mental brutality. The network of what impacts child safety is vast and it's interconnected, and there's a lot to unpack. I would like Vidya to give us some opening comments on what the current biggest challenge is in the fight against child sexual abuse.
Okay, so I'm assuming you're asking me this question about sexual violence of children offline.
Yes.
Because the whole dynamics of sexual violence of children online is very different, yeah? So I would say the biggest challenge right now is people at least accepting the possibility that sexual violence could happen to children, not from a certain demographic, but across the board. It could happen with people who are known to the child, and that very often children don't disclose the abuse. I think that's the biggest thing, because people have these strange notions and misconception and myths about sexual violence. And when you look at the fact that there's children, sex, and violence, all three in the same combination, it really is very unnerving for most people. And they believe that by not acknowledging it, that they could wish it away. So, if you look at the map of India, the eastern map of India, the eastern contours of India are concave. And you look at the western contours of Australia, they're kind of, convex. And I truly believe that India and Australia were part of the same Asian landmass and then broke up. And the ostriches remained in Australia and the human ostriches came to India. Because we don't tend to actually acknowledge it. And by not acknowledging it, you're not able to really, to deal with the issue appropriately and the way it deserves. So I think it's first is society's understanding that every child is vulnerable to abuse because you don't know who the abuser is, and putting in the safeguards. In India, unfortunately, we have this huge belief that what is government doing? Government can only do what governments can do, but it's we as society who have to be beyond passive onlookers and be active bystanders to address sexual violence across the board.
Tsitsi, you recently worked and researched on a report that's titled Ending Online Sexual Exploitation and Abuse of Women and Girls, a call for international standards. Following up on what Vidya shared with us, can you tell us some of the findings that the report yielded and what you are seeing as an expert on the field?
Thank you. So as Equality Now, we work around the use of the law to achieve systemic change. So our report was really focusing on trying to understand the law, looking at addressing online sexual exploitation and abuse at the international level, but also regionally and at country level. So we selected 5 countries, which were India, Kenya, the UK, Nigeria, and the US, just trying to understand what is the law in place, how is it working, and what is the impact of that on victims and survivors. So some of our key findings were, once you start to look at the online space, that our laws have really not kept up with the technological advances. So technology is evolving extremely fast, but our laws are outdated and then don't fully take into account all the issues around the issue of technology. So we found that is a particularly huge gap. And once you move on to the online space, another thing that we unpacked was the fact that these crimes are not necessarily being perpetrated within just a particular country, because the internet is borderless. We have so many of these cases where the victim is in one country, the perpetrator may be in a third country, people that are viewing these images online may be in multiple countries, and the servers or the platforms on which the exploitation is occurring may yet be in a third country. So how do you resolve that in terms of victims accessing justice? Where do you go to in terms of investigation? So some of those challenges in the sense that actually what we are dealing with is primarily a borderless or multi-jurisdictional crimes, and that then requires governments to be working together, law enforcement to be working together to ensure that victims access justice. So an overall, lack of laws that really address the issues in the digital space, I think, was one of our key findings.
Right. Dr. Debarati, zeroing it down to India, we do know that a lot of laws exist, and the legal framework here does, claim to cater to this crisis that we have at hand. But do you think that it is adequately equipped to deal with it? And do you think our law and order systems are sensitized enough, to deal with an issue as crucial as this?
Okay. I have got, two-layered answer for this. One is for offline victimization and the other is for the online victimization. Very recently, we had seen a judgment from a court, that is High Court, and which is about skin-to-skin judgment. So when you see these kinds of judgments, you basically ask a question whether the judges are really eligible to be judges to, see or judge the sexual offenses against children. Because if you see from the POCSO Act perspective, which is one of the prominent acts for giving justice to victims and survivors of child sexual abuse, you do get to see that there are lots of promises, but when you get to see these kinds of judgments, you do understand that these promises may not be properly executed. However, the good point is that now the judgment has been again reconsidered for the positive understandings, and we are getting to see that there are lots of criticisms against such kinds of understanding. This is number one. Now, when I'm talking from the perspective of online sexual abuse of children, again there are several layers of criminal justice response, or criminal justice, I would rather say, responsibilities on behalf of the police and also the judges, the courts, the prosecutors, etc. The first and foremost, even though we have got laws which are promising very good security for the children, I am not very sure that whether these laws are properly being executed in all pockets of India. One of the examples that I would like to take up is that even though it's an old example, but it will be standing the test of the time, Kathua rape case. even though this had happened physically, but the image of the victim was widely shared, which basically violated the Child Right Convention, which violated the child rights as has been understood by Constitution of India and by the Juvenile Justice Act, and also by POCSO Act. Very recently, I also am aware that there had been a celebrity child threat. Obviously, that some messages were passed for doing sexual violence against the child. And to my surprise, I have seen, and also shock, I have seen that many people were basically violating the privacy of the child by taking the names, that is personally identifiable information by which you can basically identify who the child is. And we must not forget that in Katwa case, Supreme Court had taken a suo motu cognizance in this regard, that the privacy of the child should be respected. So when we see, again coming back to your question, that when we see that written laws are there, there are systems for administering justice, there are systems for rehabilitation of the victim, there are systems for rescuing of children who are victims of sexual abuse, including online sexual abuse. But I think that awareness needs to be created on these topics, or on these issues also, whereby the child is child may feel secured when the child grows older, when the child becomes an adult, because there is no past record that is available to make him or her more traumatized.
So Tanvi, if you don't mind, I'd like to jump in and I'd like to respond to both Tsitsi and Debarati. Not respond, I'd like to add on three things. One is that there is justice and there is justice. So at the simplest level, what are we looking at justice when we're looking at sexual violence? Is that the child is believed. The person, it could be an adult. They're believed when they do say that they have been the victims of sexual violence. We first haven't even crossed that barrier, because invariably it's met with shame, disbelief, secrecy. So I think there is justice and there is justice. And the simplest form of justice is within all of us to give to that person. That's one. The second thing I would like to say is that Debarati was talking about, the skin to skin Bombay, the High Court judgment, Nagpur High Court judgment. Today, there was another whopper. Allahabad High Court says that a child who is, who's a victim of oral sex,
yes,
it's not as bad because there was no penile penetration. So what is this? So are we then going to be sitting and evaluating different body parts in their severity when it all actually comes substantively under one aspect of law? And at the end of it, I mean, who's a judge to decide the seriousness when it is there in the statute books? Absolutely. Two, the third point I want to make is that we're talking about online especially. There was a Chief Constable, Simon Bailey, in 2013 in the United Kingdom, who very famously said this and earned a great deal of flack about this. But he truly made a very sensible statement. He said, can we really prosecute ourselves out of online sexual violence? Because at any given time, while I'm saying that sentence, can we really prosecute ourselves out of online sexual violence? There are 20,000 men across the UK accessing child sexual abuse material. Are we going to be able to prosecute all child sexual, or 20,000 men? So his whole contribution then was, we must look at how do we help people who identify their sexual interest in children even before they get to that point of exercising that interest. And I think we need to do a combination of all these things, really, because we need to be pragmatic. At the same time, we need to be, hold people accountable. Yeah.
Right. Tsitsi, would you like to weigh in on this, since, the report that you've worked on, it also touches upon a lot of aspects of sex trafficking and abuse that we see online?
Yeah, I think, the points that the other speakers have made are very valid, and it's something that we also talk about in the report, that the strategies around, addressing the issues have to be multi-sectoral. They have to involve multiple stakeholders. You have to be looking at prevention, prosecution, protection, So looking at it, more holistically than just one aspect of it. And I think also what we say in the report quite clearly is that you need multiple stakeholders to come to the table, and that we collectively work at the solutions. You need civil society organizations that are working directly with survivors because they can talk about the experiences of survivors or survivors themselves, to share their perspectives. You need the tech platforms, that are developing this technology that people are misusing. And we know that tech companies are also trying to come up with tools to detect, abuse on their platforms and so on. You also need policymakers, who can look at the law and say, oh, well, maybe we need to structure it in this way for the law to be effective. How do we future-proof our laws when we know that technology is, evolving so rapidly? So what we are calling for as Equality Now is, it's not just one sector that has the solution, but we need multiple, stakeholders from across our society to be looking at all of these things. The issue of awareness raising and education amongst children, parents, and the community is also very important. So what role can the media play as well in amplifying the fact that we have this huge problem, looking at some of these issues around stigma and stigmatization of victims and things like that. So we are really calling, I suppose, for a multi-stakeholder conversation and approach to finding solutions. But at the same time, we are also saying, we cannot just rely on national responses. So it's insufficient for one country to say, we've got all our laws in place, we are educating our children, because actually the problem is global and it is multi-jurisdictional in terms of how it plays out. So even at the international level, how do we bring in governments, the international community, UN and regional bodies to be looking at this more from a global perspective? Because what we need are global solutions that can then be tailored, at the level. But if we just go with national silos, we are not addressing the problem, because the problem is global, because the internet, by its very nature, is global.
Right. Thank you, Tsitsi. Thank you for bringing up the topic of stakeholders, because I think at a very micro magnified level, parents and family, they become a very important stakeholders in this conversation. And, our experts in the grassroots, working at the grassroots, Vidya, all of you can, tell me whether, the gap between parents getting educated on child sexual abuse prevention and their children getting educated on the same exists. Can that gap ever be filled? And what solutions are being devised? Because we've spoken a lot about these policies being made, or this education being made mainstream in schools and at homes, but we don't see that coming about.
Yeah, so my take on sexual violence prevention, I think children should be involved, but I think they should be further down in the people who actually have to protect themselves. I think we as a society have to shoulder that burden. We as the adults around a child have to ensure that we put the safeguards in. Children, certainly, we live in a different kind of society. I mean, when most of us, I think when all four, maybe not you, but I'm sure in City and Debarati and I grew up, we didn't have access to technology as much as kids do now. They're born digital. They're not even digital natives. They're born digital. So I certainly think children need to be involved. But I do not think in that, doing that, we as adults have to fail in our obligation. Because it's very easy. The easiest, softest target to land on is the kids. What about we as adults? I'll give you a small example. You talk about the children they talk to children about personal safety education. First of all, they use the wrong terminology about good touch and bad touch. And is it all about touching? Isn't it about respecting the child for who they are, dignifying the child? We don't do that. It's all in these little silos. It cannot be. It has to be connected. Where is sexuality education for young people in India? One side we talk about child marriage. One side we talk about high teenage pregnancy. But no, according to POCSO, all kids below 18 are asexual. I mean, where are we? It's such a huge conundrum, really. So Debarati, would you like to add something to that whole mess?
Yes, of course. I would like to add from the perspective of online, sexual understanding or the sexual maturity of the children. We have seen that, there are, as Tetsu was also telling, that, the different stakeholders need to be included in this. Now, who are these stakeholders? Obviously, I, as a parent, also understand that what my daughter would be accessing, that may be beyond my control. And here comes the question, like I was giving this example to my students also. Consider this example, when suppose, for example, a teenager or a minor accesses a car key of an SUV, and he takes out that car and he drives the car, and he commits an accident. We always think that how come the parents have given access to that key to a minor who is not eligible to drive the car? Are we thinking about the same thing when we are talking about, accessing the internet, the device, and also accessing certain contents with the child, which the child is actually accessing without maybe the knowledge of the parents? Now, also we have to understand one thing, that most of the times the parents may not have the time, the parents may not understand also that what is the impact of that content on the psychology of the child, on the mental well-being of the child. Sometimes I have seen that the children who are getting to see, especially during the pandemic, who are getting to see that the parents are always bickering, the parents are, fighting with each other, and also the parents are undergoing many depressive situations. The child may get some kind of like pleasure or some kinds of happiness by seeing the audiovisual images, which may or may not include some sexual contents. Now here again comes the question that you cannot make the child stop viewing these things. Say for example, if the child wants to see some contents which is having some pet dogs, or for example any animals, funny animals, etc., can you stop the child from watching, like say for example dogs giving birth, or lions mating? You cannot, because this will automatically come. And here I guess that there could have been some kind of controlling mechanism on the what do you call it's on the intermediary, but even that is also not possible, because this is a kind of I would not even say it's a sea, but it's an ocean. So you keep on surfing and many things come up. At the same time also, I have seen that there are children who are not only seeing it for their own pleasure, or who are not only seeing it for getting diverted from what's happening at home. They're also sharing these things, they're making the groups, and they're sharing these things to holistically enjoying. That's a kind of bacha party, that's a kind of child party, where I would not use the term child party, but it's a party of the adolescent or maybe matured adolescents, where they would be discussing certain things, that what is happening at home, and how to come out of that particular tension. Here again we are getting to see one more thing is happening, that is the children are sharing certain thoughts, the children are sharing certain private information, which in our generation we have been told that never share with others. And in that case, what happens? Say for example, when the child is getting to see that the father is making some kinds of lewd comments to the mother, or say for example the father and mother, they are fighting for some kinds of sexual what do you call, dissatisfaction, unsatisfaction, because we have seen so many cases coming up where the man wanted to see some kinds of sexual content, and the wife said no, you cannot, because there are children. And obviously there had been so many sunny leoles, sunny deols, and all these things happening online when the pandemic was going on. The entire family was there at home. Now the children are basically sharing these kinds of information, who is watching what, and how the parents are watching, which parent is watching what sort of contents, everything is being shared. So in my understanding that the parents, it is high time that the parents must understand not only what the children should watch or what the children should not watch, but what is the impact of that particular content on the minds of the child. Suppose for example, if a child has been exposed to certain contents, definitely, as Vidya is also telling, that the children would not like to share, because this is the age where the children would like to keep everything with themselves, and they would like to share with fellow children who understand what what's exactly happening with others also, how to resolve, what to do in such cases. But I always feel that if the parent becomes a friend, not harming the like rights or privacy rights, whatever you call, of the other parents or even the child, and they start sharing that, that this might give you a temporary pleasure, but please do understand that there are risks involved in it. And if it is giving some kind of temporary pleasure, how to come out of it so that you don't get addicted to it. So it's a kind of like, awareness, it's a kind of training that should be given to the parents, obviously to the teachers also, because the worst part is that if the child, forget about the parents, if the child feels that that the teacher can be trusted, the teacher will be taking a u-turn to basically blame the children, that why were you exposed to certain things, why did you see it. And I do not understand one thing, especially the like senior adolescents, when the teacher starts telling that why did you see that, the teacher forgets that probably the child is also the student of biology. Probably the child has seen the classes of reproductory organs or related materials. And now that we are in the like online era, probably the teacher had also shown something which we cannot say that it is sexual, but it is for the academic purposes, and that may have kindled some more interest in the minds of the children, that let us go and see it. So I think it is the it is high time that the parents must get educated, aware about many other things beyond how to control the children, and also how to give them access to certain devices or the internet access. This is what the parents must be aware of.
Right. So you brought up the pandemic, and I think that's a very, very valid point of how child sex abuse data has, it's ascending. It's only ascending during the pandemic. Of course, the situation wasn't any better before the pandemic, because National Crime Records Bureau data from 2018 shows that there was a 22% jump in the statistics of child sex abuse in India, and almost 109 children were abused every single day. That reality has only worsened during the pandemic. Do you think, as grassroots workers, Vidya, you can weigh in on this probably, do you think the pandemic has done damage that be very, very hard to undo on the ground level?
Okay, so Gadvi, first of all, NCRB data needs to be taken with a gunny bag of salt. The way it's collated and compiled, that's a whole different seminar by itself. But there is no data to show that there has actually been an increase in sexual violence reported. There could be an increase in online violence, but actual violence, sexual violence reported, there's maybe no data. However, from our anecdotal experience and talking to organizations across, two things which are very, very clear. Disclosure has come down dramatically because the opportunities for a child to disclose about abuse dramatically dropped. They were stuck inside their houses. They didn't have access to schools, to neighbors. And if they had, usually children may talk to their friends, may talk to their neighbors, may talk to their teachers. Teachers are very revered and demigods, at least till your 9th standard. So the disclosure, the opportunities for disclosure definitely dropped. Definitely child marriage increased. There is no doubt about it. And now we are now seeing, there's another trend which we are noticing of late. Teenage pregnancies dramatically increased. And in fact, my colleague and I were discussing this as to why, when the reporting of sexual violence didn't increase, teenage pregnancies increased. And she had a very good point. She said, look at it. So this lockdown's been on and off. Kids are being cooped up. People whom they normally wouldn't have looked at twice now suddenly become, pretty much the center of their lives, their neighbors, the roadside Romeo down the road, etc. So you have kids in very, very concerning, vulnerable situations, then also indulging in a lot of risky behavior without understanding the consequences. Now, to also carry on from what Debarati said, we do not recognize children as sexual beings. We do not believe children have sexual identities. We do not think of sexuality education for children. We only talk about the mechanics. What about the psychosocial development which accompanies sexual development? Nada. We don't do anything like that. And that is very worrying. Where is the reproductive health information given to young people? If you talk to a lot of young women who are, who have become pregnant, and you ask them about their pregnancies, a lot of them didn't want to be pregnant. They just didn't know how to access information. If you go to a hospital now for an MTP, you're reported to the police, and then a POXO case is filed. So now MTPs have gone underground. They go to quacks and backside alleys. Can you imagine the high mortality there? So I think this needs to be recognized. Children need to be recognized for who they are. Young people, we shouldn't infantilize all people below 18 as children. I would prefer to use the term children and young people. And unless we let the scales fall from our eyes, we are doing the greatest disservice to the young people and children in this country.
Right. So when we speak of digital tools that we have at hand, we say that, they are revolutionizing our world as we know it. And, we are making development at a very, very fast pace. But that kind of development is very unfair and unjust to certain communities because it's pretty incomplete. It does not ensure full and safe protection at all times at all. I mean, every social media channel does have safety guidelines, but we know that they have huge glaring gaps. Is social media and big tech, the big tech data that's sitting in Silicon Valley, are they taking enough accountability of their actions? And what more do they need to do?
Look what happened to Apple, for heaven's sake. Apple tried to do something and there was such a big pushback, they roll back. And it's a pity they roll back. And I think that's something people need to just. UK, I love it. The UK is really coming on hard on City. You can maybe tell us this. UK is really coming on very hard on tech companies, and I'm glad they're doing it. Europe is actually.
Yeah, I think there's been more of a move to make tech accountable. I think when you sort of look at it historically in the US, for instance, with their Communications Decency Act, the idea was that tech companies were not, they are not publishers, so they are not responsible for third-party content on their platforms. And that in the context of the US, for instance, it sort of enabled online sex trafficking to occur, and then we saw, the clampdown with laws that were looking at tech companies that knowingly facilitate sex trafficking and so on. But I think there's a general move to make, to really look at tech accountability through the law, because I think there's a general acceptance that voluntary measures are not working. Just by saying tech companies look at the situation and address it, that is not necessarily addressing the problem. So the UK is at the moment developing their online safety bill. It's still under discussion. Lots of questions around how they'll balance between freedom of expression and privacy and safety online and things like that, but there are discussions ongoing just in terms of how to make that bill stronger and work in terms of, child protection and also protecting, women and young people, online. I think as well, just going back to the issue of safety, I think there's also a responsibility on tech platforms themselves to design safety into their products so that, safety of users is not an afterthought, but it's something that is embedded in the design of products. So if Facebook is developing their products or their platforms, are they thinking of safety of the users as a primary issue, or are they then thinking about it afterwards? So I think, there's more of a push for, we need to be building in safety in AI and in terms of how we are developing our technology online. Yeah.
Right. Dr. Debarati, we spoke of, whether the law and order system is sensitized enough to deal with an issue as important as child sex abuse. Do you think, as a legal expert, do you think that the law and order in our country can be built better to accommodate subjective experiences and trauma? Do you think it's possible?
Definitely it is possible. I'm never negative for such things, but we also have to understand one thing. When we're talking about the failures, the backlogs of the government, or for example, the criminal justice machinery to control certain criminalities, what's happening on the cyberspace. And also we are getting to see that, the government is also creating certain statutes, etc., certain rules, etc., to basically control the intermediary. We have to see one more thing also here. Have you noticed that the government organizations, government agencies, the courts, the the other stakeholders which are related to the government, they all have Twitter or, say, for example, Facebook, etc., handles, which means that even if we say that no, we are going to control, we are basically sharing our data on the platforms, on the social intermediary platforms. So I think that more discussions on such things, that is especially for the privacy related data, privacy related issues, child safety, and also for, as Vidya mentioned, young people's safety, young adult safety. All these things must be discussed. And also I'll go to I'll take Tsitsi's thing, that what she told is that all the intermediaries, all the platforms, all the tech companies, they must design their infrastructure, they must design their platform in such a way that the children or even the adults, including the young adults, they are not harmed when they are doing their business and we are using that business as consumers or customers.
Right. So I think we're running a little bit short on time. I'd like you all panelists to just give us some closing comments on what you see, on where you see the fight against CSA in the next 5 years, like a short-term vision. What do you see it as?
I would say, hopefully, I mean, it's not that there's going to be a dramatic increase in reporting of crime, but if the confidence of the people in the implementation of, when they do reports, is not secondary victimization, I think we've made great headway. Right now, it's complete secondary victimization. There is no question about it. India has a mandatory reporting law, but I will be the first one to tell you I don't mandatory report because I'm never going to walk in that person's shoes, and I can't make them walk in those shoes when I know how bad the system is in terms of responding. So I would just say at least those cases which are reported, I don't want sensitivity. That's too much to ask for. Sensitivity can't be trained, but an efficient handling of that case, more than the motives, I'd be very happy.
Right. Dr. Debarati?
In my understanding, I will go with Vidya also, but in my understanding, yes, of course, child sexual abuse will increase in future, but obviously it's not the dramatic increase because, again, I'm telling that I trust and I believe in law and justice machinery. But what we need to see is that how the reporting of such things are being done by the media, how the protection of the data is being maintained by the criminal justice machinery as a whole and by the prosecutors also. And also how the parents of the children, they are turning supportive for the child victims. So I think that if the society becomes more responsible, then definitely this ever-growing pandemic, that can be controlled to a certain extent.
Right. Tsitsi, some closing remarks from you?
Yeah, I think for me, it's, really looking at it more as a global problem and looking at, what are those solutions that collectively, as all people across all countries, how do we effectively address this as, something that is growing everywhere in the world, that is, global in nature. So what does that global response look like? How do we get political will from, our governments, the international community to really take, action against child sexual abuse online? Yeah.
Thank you, panelists, so much for joining me. This was a very enriching session, and hoping that going forward, we'll do more and our society will do more in the area of, fighting child sexual abuse. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.